Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Really delighted to welcome you to the second webinar in our series for the MOOC, the Digital Literacy Lab for Educators. It might be that some of you have joined us who aren't part of the course, and we'll share details at the end of this session if you'd like to join us and see what materials we have been studying the past 3 weeks or so. So it's my huge pleasure this morning, or rather this afternoon, dependent on where you're sat and tuning in, to introduce Janette Ballard, who is formerly of the BBC and developed media literacy programs for the BBC, and is now the founder and director of Be Smart Cookie. And just at this point, a note of thanks to my colleagues, Kirk Paris over in Canada, Alex Grech over in Malta, and Courtney Bonnet over in London. So if I may set the scene for this session, which we've entitled Digital Literacy as the Urgency of Digital Literacy. And we suggested we might put a question mark at the end of this, but of course, as we're all experiencing in our current times, it feels that with every day, digital literacy feels more and more urgent, which I'm sure Janette will guide us through superbly. So if I may set the scene in terms of the course material and the other session that we've already had, the forum on the Digital Literacy Lab for Educators MOOC has been really abuzz with some really interesting questions and queries about what digital literacy is, and that's something that we really explored with Professor Gary Falloon in our first webinar. And there we talked about sort of this label danger, the danger of defining, labeling something, and also moving from theory to practice, which I think is what we're going to really do today. A few housekeeping things. So the way that this session will run is that in a moment I'll hand over to Janette, and we've really looked to make this session as interactive as possible. So we really do encourage you to come forward with reflections or queries and questions at any point throughout in the chat, and we will at points take a pause and respond to your comments. So without further ado, huge pleasure. Thank you so much, Janette, for giving up your time and joining us today. I noted in your biography that you speak about supporting truth seekers. Well, I think anyone who's logged on to this webinar this morning, this afternoon, this evening is definitely in that category. So thank you so much again, and really looking forward to seeing what you've got to share with us and get us all thinking, reflecting, debating and engaging with this question of digital literacy and its urgency.
Thank you so much, Emma. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this next hour with you. And I actually think I might well get more out of it than you get out of it. But let's hope that you get some takeaway from me. Okay, so what I want to do is jump straight in with a little brain teaser to get you all warmed up. So I'm going to share my screen to here, and if you can open your chat boxes, that would be great. Now, here's a little brain teaser. Can you answer this question? I'm looking at the chat box to see if anyone is being brave enough to come forward. Let's have a look. So Emma, actually, I don't see the chat when I'm, let me do it like this. But now you can all see so when I'm sharing screen, Emma, I can't see the chat. Has anyone come forward with an answer?
Not as yet. I've got...
Can anyone see the mistake?
Myself. All panelists and attendees. Bring everybody up. Everyone's very confused already. Oh, yes.
Actually, coming in, and I can see it. I can just move it to over here then. There is no 0. Okay, thank you, Pamela. You're right, there is no 0. Very true. Anyone else? I'll tell you, the mistake is the word the appears twice. Can you find the mistake? Honestly, this is just a brain teaser to make sure that everybody's awake and with us. But in fact, what I often find when talking about media literacy or digital literacy or news literacy is that the problem is as much in the question that you ask as in the answer, and this is a sort of example of that. Okay, let me move on. Make sure this works. There we go. Okay, I'll just minimize that for now. So what I want to do this morning, this afternoon, sorry, is take you all on a journey down just one of many, many, many pathways that exist in the huge digital landscape, the digital world, with all its noise and all its chaos. I think if it were possible to agree on a way to carve up the digital space, you might call the area that I want to journey us through news or information. And of course, with that comes disinformation or misinformation. And on that journey, I hope to do a number of things. I want to explore with you some of the features of this part of the digital world, do a little bit of looking back to the past and to the present, and in conversation, if you want to go there, we can look to the future. It'd be good to establish some of the problems that exist in this area and take a broad view of some of the solutions that are on offer, including the digital literacy type offers available. And most of all, I really want to leave time for discussion and questions, because honestly, I do not have all the answers. I have lots and lots of questions too. So, all right, let's get started. Don't sit back, don't relax too much, because I'm going to ask you to participate throughout. So please jump in with your comments, mainly through the chat box is how we're going to do that. So first of all, let me take you up to the door that we will open, and on the other side of this door is Digital World. And this sign is on the door, and this sign tells us three things. It tells us that through this door there is some chaos and disorder. It tells us that in particular the part of the digital landscape that we're visiting is where news and information, and of course disinformation, often referred to as fake news, sits. And the third thing it tells us is about our struggle to date to define the landscape. And as Emma has pointed out, definitions and so on came up last week in your conversation. But we all know that without agreed definitions of things, it's quite hard to discuss, to identify problems and to identify solutions to those problems. So it is, already right from the start, a tricky area to work in. I should say that there are people who have done a lot of work in this area, but to date, there's no real sort of mutually agreed set of vocabulary and principles and definitions and structure around it. In particular, let's go through the door, if I can go through the door. In particular, around the question of the landscape and fake news in particular. So First Draft, I don't know if you know First Draft, they're really worthwhile looking up. They've done a lot of work to map the landscape, and I think that what they've come up with is a really useful set of information around what mis and disinformation are. You may know that there's been a sort of pushback against the phrase fake news because it doesn't really tell you very much about what it means. It's also been devalued by politicians using it to dismiss questions or dodge questions or avoid the truth, shall we say. But also, as First Draft point out, it's not very useful in that if we can define the problem a bit more carefully, then we can address it a bit more carefully. So this is there. I won't go through it because you can easily look it up for yourselves if it's of interest to you, but this is their carving up of the landscape. And as I used to work for the BBC and still do head up their media literacy work for the BBC, I thought I'd share with you how the BBC have defined the misinformation, disinformation world. So the BBC's definition of misinformation is false, misleading, or out of context news and information, and it may or may not be motivated. So that's a good example of, in some cases, people suggest that misinformation has no motivation, so it's mistakes. But in the BBC's definitions, they've decided to say it may or may not be motivated, and therefore it gives you misinformation as the catch-all word. whereas disinformation is deliberately false, where people have deliberately delivered misleading or out of context information. It's designed to be widely shared, to cause harm, to persuade people to think or vote a certain way, or to make money from advertising. And then there's malinformation, which is information that's used to inflict harm. It may or may not have some or be entirely true, but it's used specifically to inflict harm on others. So let's go back to this term fake news. The BBC do still use this term, and many, many others do as well. And part of the reason for that is in every part of the world where I've worked for the BBC, everyone has understood the term fake news. It's a real punch through phrase, whether we, appreciate its devaluation or not. It's a real punch through phrase. And so whatever language people are speaking, wherever I've worked, fake news are words that are used in English. So when you're a broadcaster and you're communicating to people, then you, to some degree, have to use the language that people will understand. And so we do still use the term, although the BBC use it much more carefully. But as you can see, it covers all sorts of misleading and incorrect information, and politicians and activists have used it to insult opponents or dismiss stories that they don't like. Okay. So that's the way that first often, in particular the BBC, carve up the disinformation landscape. What I want to do at this moment is take you through the door to see what kind of, as it were, offences we find that make up the whole package of misinformation. What do we find that we don't like and that leads people to believe or be misled by information? And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that you see me full screen, which may or may not be your choice. But I also want to see the chat really well. So I wonder if you can help me in the chat to say what kinds of things we find out there. Some people are saying the chat is disabled. Everyone happy? What kind of things do we find? Everything from hoax photographs, Photoshop things. What kind of false information have you found when you've either been teaching or used the internet and so on yourself? What kind of things?
So just to flag to everyone to head over to the Q&A where you can type your responses. I'm getting a list as long as my arm, Janette.
Are you? Oh, right. So I should be answered then. Okay, excellent.
Well, it's in personally, until everybody else comes forward with the spaces where they find misinformation or misleading ideas. It's like, where do you stop? Where do you stop?
Can you throw them? Can you say them? Can you say what some of them are?
Well, we've got one from a participant. So WhatsApp information.
Yeah, nice. Oh, yes, I can see that. Lovely. Fake money. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Social media posts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We find all sorts of things, don't we? We find fake photographs, misleading headlines, old photographs used in current stories, old videos used in current stories, videos from different parts of the world used in current stories. We find misquotes, people made up. We find hoax deaths. We find, and of course it can change whether it's in closed conversation media like WhatsApp. You don't even know what's there because it's all closed conversation. But we know that there's all sorts of ways that we can find false and misleading and come across false and misleading information on our journey when we're just simply using either social media or the internet. So by way of a little test, I'm going to re-share my screen. I'm just going to check that other things have come in. Yeah, WhatsApp is one of the major sources, absolutely. And that's absolutely right. And it's really, really hard to address the WhatsApp problem because it's such a closed conversation and all encrypted. So it takes a long time before something comes out of that and into the public domain for people to realize that there was even a rumor going round. Yeah, photos don't match with the news. Yeah, that's a really interesting one about the photos not matching with the news, actually, because I actually sometimes take issue even with the sort of what you might see as benign examples of that. So, you know, President Trump has a bad day today, and you see a picture of President Trump with his head in his hands, but of course, it's just a library photo. It's not from that day or that moment. And I'm often not sure that people realize that. And sometimes I think it's pushed a little too far, even in the mainstream or most trusted, shall we say, news outlets. Yeah, WhatsApp is coming up, isn't it? Oh dear. Yeah, weight loss, absolutely. Health issues, full of fake stories, false stories. Obviously, we've seen that with we currently have a pandemic, but it's hand in hand with an infodemic. Picture manipulation, yes. Bad figures and facts, yes. Goodness me. You can get the numbers to say whatever you want, can't you? Yeah, it's a bit frustrating. Yes, it is frustrating. Absolutely. False location of story. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, and Mushtaq Kuzan, I'm not sure if that's your surname or your first name, but you're absolutely right. Lots of news outlets have a point of view. They come from a specific point of view, and depending on which environment you're in, that can be more or less obvious. In the UK context, our broadcasters have quite strictly regulated impartiality clauses that they have to fulfill for their license to be continued. Whereas the press here in the UK have a much more obvious editorial point of view. But again, you know, that's part of the literacy question, isn't it? To what extent is that understood by users? Okay, all right, so I'm gonna give you a little test. I hope you don't mind. Let's share this. And I'm just gonna show you a few pictures, and I want you to tell me if you, oh, I'm sorry, let's do this one then. So why do we need news literacy? So we've answered some of those questions, haven't we? It's easy to access, there's a vast digital landscape. It's easy to create it, it's easy to publish it, it's easy to share it. What else? There's little ineffective curation going on in much of the internet and certainly the social media space. It can create bubbles and echo chambers, bots and text distortions. It's easy to fake and fool. Okay, and there are some problems with what it can achieve, which is, you know, it can cause mistrust and confusion, hatred and violence. Certainly we've seen that in parts of the world, India, where literally fake news has led to deaths and violence. Can persuade and interfere electoral processes, cause alarm and fear, cause people to believe something that isn't true. It means you may become a victim of fraud. Somebody talked about false money and being a victim of self-harm. Okay, so here's my quiz. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this picture? You can answer in the chat box. I'm afraid I'll have to have the chat box up to be able to see your answers, so that doesn't get in the way of the story.
Oh, shadow. We've got lots of shadows.
Shadow, very good. That's exactly right. Wrong shadow. There you go. So this is a pretty obvious example, but one way to check a picture is appropriate for the story that it's been put up with is to look at the shadows, whether it's the right time of day and that kind of thing. And certainly in the journalism world, when they're doing fact checking or verification work around social media content that's coming into the BBC, they're doing a lot of that. Let's do another one. Does anybody know this story?
Oh gosh, yeah, I remember this.
Yeah.
This was over here in the UK.
Yeah, this is a UK story. It happened during our general election at the end of last year. It's a picture of a little boy waiting on the floor of a hospital for treatment and at Leeds General Infirmary. And the story went out, and what happened was actually people began to say it's been fixed. It's not real, in that, okay, there is a little boy on the floor, but his parents put him there to take the picture. However, it was actually a genuine picture that went out, and the story was genuine. And the very, very first report of the story, the reporter had done his homework and gone and checked with the hospital that this had happened, and the hospital had already acknowledged it. But, you know, what's the phrase? Lies travel around the world before truth's even got its boots on. You know, even though the picture was initially reported correctly, it then had this piece of fake information, false information attached to it, and that actually got a lot of traction. Yeah, lots of people got the shadow one right. Well done. Okay, she seems to be a girl. Yeah, could be. Say, yeah, I know what you mean. Absolutely. There are all sorts of things that you could ask about that picture. Okay, what about this one? What do you think might be wrong with this picture? Here's a girl in a mask holding a banner saying we don't care about COVID-19. Any offers? Yeah, context. Yeah, exactly. Joe Pentecost, I don't know where you are, but you're exactly right. The banner has been changed. It's so easy to do. It's so easy to do. It's such a common thing. It's so easy to do. Yeah, the banner got changed. So, but you know, there was a clue that it was because she's wearing a mask, right? And also she said they didn't change the Black Lives Matter picture behind. So there were clues there, but yeah, this stuff is tricky. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what kind of news literacy skills? And I tend to talk about news literacy skills because that's where I come from. I was a journalist for 20 years, and that's the sort of work that I do really for the BBC. But of course, most news is now in the digital space, and in a Venn diagram world, news has a huge overlap with media literacy more generally as well. I'm just checking that there's nobody asking questions. Right, so here are some stats from research that's been done about what news literacy skills are missing. So the American Press Institute did a survey in 2018 in which half of the participants did not understand the phrase op-ed. The Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, they're based in Oxford in the UK. They do large-scale global surveys, and in one that came out this year, across 18 countries, just half respondents were able to correctly identify the public broadcaster in their country. Same study found that across 18 countries, 15% of respondents incorrectly thought that various commercial TV news outlets or newspapers were not primarily funded by advertising. In Australia, 32% of young Australians, forgive me, I'm not quite sure what the definition of young was in that survey, say they pay very little attention to the source of the story, and 14% pay no attention at all. And there should be one more. 30% say they hardly ever, and 11% say they never try to verify the story. So this is just a little snapshot of some different work that's gone on around the world to try and capture what's going on and to capture the problem. There are lots of surveys that say people are worried. There are fewer, but still plenty, that actually assess people's skills and people's knowledge. And as you can see, you know, the task is big. There's a big task ahead of us for anyone working in this space. So I'll tell you what I wanted to do. I just wanted to do a bit, I'm going to take you on a detour on our little journey and do a little bit of then and now. So can you see this? Let me see if I can see it, because I can't see myself. If I can see myself. Oh yeah, okay. So look, here is my map of the, does that work? I like to do things non-digitally as well from time to time. Here is my map of the media space. And I'm glad I did some typing earlier so that I can.
So just to highlight to everyone who's joined us, if you double click on Janette's video, that will enlarge her video so you don't see the screen, and then that makes everything a little bit bigger.
Oh, right. Great idea. Yeah. So here we have everyone in the world. And in this box here, I've put the word observer. And what I mean by that is people who observe the world, largely journalists, but it's not always the case. Academics observe the world and so on. And in the middle, we've got a kind of editorial process. And here we have the audience or the consumers. Now, traditionally, it essentially went, everybody in the world had a story to tell. And their story went into the observer's box, and the observers did a bit of curation and a bit of work and a bit of research on it to figure out what their story was. And they sent their story through an editorial process, whether that was a news outlet or a newspaper or a magazine or an academic journal, etc., or a museum, whatever. And it came out through the audience who chose which outlet, and it could have been more than one. But they chose which outlet they wanted to receive their information from. The key thing here being there was this editorial process that most information flowed through. Now, you could question that editorial process, of course, but what's happening today is this. And some of it's going through the observers and some of it's not. And it is incredibly, incredibly messy, because so much of it is bypassing any editorial curation process at all. And we also know that with this process, this information, what these people are receiving and what they're looking at is traveling back to another route, which is platforms. I won't write the whole word there because I want to give you a comedy example of this problem. So if you want to make me small again and look at your screens, this cartoon came out on the cover of the New Yorker in 1993. And I mean, I remember it. I'm old enough to remember it, but I definitely remember it. And it was this, you would see it everywhere. You would go into offices and people would have it pinned on the notice board. It says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And that was the view of the internet at the time, right? There was this thing that was beginning to exist that we were beginning to get access to. Not everybody, not all at the same time, but slowly, slowly. But what was so intriguing to us then was that as a user, nobody knew who you were. Nobody knew if you were on the internet. Nobody knew what you did on the internet. Nobody knew if you were pretending to be somebody else on the internet. Nobody knew. In 2015, the New Yorker then published this article. Nominally the same two dogs in the picture. And now one says, remember when on the internet nobody knew who you were? And that's a massive change that's happened to our experience of the digital landscape, isn't it? Because now we are the consumer, our information is the product, our data is what everybody's after. And so whatever you do on the internet, even if you think you've got a pretty small digital footprint, and by any average you care to choose, you might have a small digital footprint. But if you've ever gone onto the internet, you've started to create a digital footprint, and somebody has that information somewhere. It may be that information has gone into a black hole and is never used again, but it exists and it's somewhere. And we know that people's data is being used in all sorts of ways to target advertising. That's not new. Television advertisers, newspaper advertisers, they did the same thing. Who reads this newspaper? What page do the women read? What page do the men read? What page is the sports section? And they targeted their adverts. And what's happened now is an amplification of all of that, so that so much of who we are and what we do and what we're predicted to do is known and shared. And what this does, of course, is actually, just while I'm there, because I noticed a few people had watched The Social Network on Netflix, The Social Dilemma on Netflix last week when I tuned into Professor Gary Fallon's talk. And this is absolutely what that documentary is all about, isn't it? It's all about the data that we are, and that's what's being fought over in the internet space. So with that, it means that they can try and predict what we want, and we become more at the mercy of algorithms than ever before. So when we talk about algorithms, I think I certainly for a long time thought, well, nobody's really got an algorithm on me. You know, I'm not really affected by the algorithms. And then somebody showed me this little experiment, and I'm going to do a lot of, I'm going to try and see if I can recreate it with yourselves by going here. Can everyone see my internet page? Can you see it, Emma?
Not as yet. We still got our dogs at the minute.
Oh, have you? Sharing is pause. Bring your shared screen to the front. Okay. Oh, I see. Maybe I need to do this.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If I put in, let's go, so let's show it on YouTube. YouTube's always a dead cert for this one. Right, here, I'll go into YouTube. Now, obviously, I have my own fingerprint trace and trail on YouTube, right? Because this is my computer and I use it. So you'll see loads of princess things because I have young children. If I put simple cupcake recipe in, okay, the first one that comes up is actually not just a simple cupcake recipe, but a high protein breakfast recipe. That's the first one that's come up, right? And then, oh good, I've muted it, and I'll just make myself disappear. And then the next thing that comes up is 5 vegan meals to eat every week. Okay, but I've been asking for simple cupcake recipes. And the next up video, you can see my arrow here, up next is high protein vegan meal. And the next one up is how to make something quite complicated. Oh no, this one here, vegan meal prep. And then we have more vegan meals. So already we've gone off piece, right? So I'll try it again. Come on, simple cupcake recipe. Let's have a look. All right, let's go to the really simple vanilla cupcakes. Let's start there, okay? So fine, Fiona's Food, simple cupcakes. The next video that YouTube offers me is the very best chocolate cupcake, not just any ordinary chocolate cupcake or any ordinary cupcake, the best chocolate one. Okay, and then I get offered how to make the best red velvet cupcakes. I haven't asked for any of this. This is what I'm being offered. Then I get offered how to make a layer cake. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for something anything as complicated as that. And I certainly, the next one to come up is puff pastry. I don't know or want to know how to make puff pastry. The next one up is meringue. These are really complicated, ambitious things to cook. I don't know how to do this. So you can see that as you go on through what YouTube offers you as what's up next, it gets more and more, I want to say extreme, but it pushes you to the edge, right? It's offering you more and more of something in particular directions. But actually, I mean, okay, I'm maybe 6 clicks through now, but all I wanted was a simple cupcake recipe. So I won't do it, but imagine when you put in, I don't know, is the earth round, or a political question to look at some documentaries on things. It doesn't take long if you click through the up next video to find that you're actually quite far away from where you started, and that you've gone down a route that is actually taking you to something slightly more exaggerated every time. Okay. So I'm just going to stop the share for a minute. And okay, I'm just checking the chat box as well to make sure everyone's happy and if there are any questions that come up. Okay.
Janette, we do have a couple, but I think we're gradually veering towards them. So would you
okay
like to now, or?
Yeah, I mean, if there are questions, by all means, jump in.
So we have the, I think this is the $1 billion question. How do we handle misinformation in our countries, and link to that the speculation on COVID? How do we manage this? And I suppose the first thing to say might be perhaps that you're in the right place. If you're joined this, then you're yourselves.
I would say if you've joined this, your heart is in the right place, but I'm not sure that I have answers. So I'm often asked a question a little bit along these lines, nothing quite as sophisticated as that question, but look, there is no silver bullet. So I mean, I'll come to it in a little bit, but so we have this problem in the digital space. There's lots of misinformation flying around. What can we do and who's responsible? Well, various people, right? So you've got the governments. Okay, there are difficulties with that. There would be journalists like me who would push back against anything that would look like censorship, for example. And you have governments unwilling to do too much because they don't want to rock any business-related boats, shall we say. But I mean, in this country, there's a white paper currently on the table around how to strengthen the law to help with this problem. And in a funny sort of way, I think it's too early to tell, but because so much has been done around COVID-19, it's potentially opened up conversation more than it was before the pandemic. So the same, you could take that argument to the platforms as well. So the platforms, are they responsible for this problem? Well, certainly a lot of this stuff happens on their platforms, but they of course say that they're not publishers, they are platforms, and they don't really want to get involved in regulation. They don't want their wings clipped. They are businesses. They were not set up to in any democratic way. They're businesses, and they, you know, I have some sympathy with the argument that they never expected to be so heavily at the centre of a democratic hot potato, shall we say? You know, I mean, I'm not defending them, but I can see that, you know, Facebook didn't necessarily see this coming. I would say it's been present for long enough now that, you know, that argument no longer holds. But yeah, I would say, you know, 5-10 years ago, they probably didn't see this problem coming and that they were going to be in the heart of it. And then you have the fact-checking world. So wonderful, wonderful people in the fact-checking world. Some are paid journalists, some just do it for the love of trying to get the truth. And as a truth seeker myself, I applaud them. But again, the lie has gone around the world before truth has its boots on. Once it's out there, it's very, very difficult to capture it back in. And I think almost all mainstream, what I would call trusted news organizations, and by trusted, I don't mean trusted by me, I mean trusted by public survey, have some kind of fact-checking process going on beyond, as it were, beyond the news that they were producing anyway. And then you have, you know, then you can argue, well, let's improve even further the quality of good journalism out there. Let's be more transparent about the journalism. And you can see that happening. You can see it in BBC stories. You can see it in others as well, that there's more transparency about how they have come to a story so that people can decide for themselves. And then you have the media literacy, digital literacy, news literacy folk like us. And this is not a silver bullet, and it is also a lifelong, never-ending learning need. It's never going to stop. It's not like we can, it's not like riding a bike. You know, there are elements of it that will be really useful, but we are always all going to need to keep learning more about what's going wrong in order to not be fooled by it ourselves. So I think if I can also just come back to that question later in terms of what literacy models are out there. And because again, so the research does not say this works and this doesn't. It's very, very difficult to get good research that really can cut through the noise of everything else to show what media literacy or digital literacy projects are working. We know the Finland story, and I know that you all know the Finland story as well. And I think there's really something very valuable in that story. And my guess is that there are no quick, short, sharp solutions, that all solutions are going to be long-term, you know, embedded in people's education and learning that they can then take on, in the same way that, you know, you learn to navigate a book when you're a child and you hold on to those things forever, but you're always going to have to adapt and upgrade it. So we learn a whole load of vocabulary, but our vocabulary we keep on having to expand because new words come into the dictionaries and so on. So I think it's a similar process, actually. Is that okay at this point? And then I'll come back to the different models of it. Yeah?
No, super. Just to address, there was a query about digital literacy, because we've been talking about digital literacy through these weeks, and I can see that could cause confusion because we're talking here about news, information, media literacy, and of course they overlap and intersect in so many ways, I suppose. So that to address, and maybe Janette, I don't know how you might see them pair together, but to my mind, sort of digital literacy is really that news, information, media literacy with the focus online. Or how would you pair them together?
Yes, I mean, it's really interesting. It actually goes back in a way to what I said at the beginning, which is that it's really hard to carve up the digital space. And that's partly because even if you come up with what looks like a nice system, invariably as users, and that's what we need to come back to all the time, as users, we're cutting across that Venn diagram all the time, aren't we? So today, I have watched television news, I've listened to radio news, I've been online and taken in several different outlets, news and information. Of course, I've been on my WhatsApp, I've had text messages, emails. And so I have both been in the digital space where, yes, digital literacy skills are needed, but a lot of those skills are also the same skills I would need to understand, you know, why did I watch the BBC and not another channel this morning? Or why did I read The Sun and not, I didn't read The Sun, but why might I have read The Sun and not another newspaper? So yes, it is very tricky, and it's not a tidy model. I certainly don't have a tidy model, and I myself am reluctant to go too far down the line of that it's all generic, therefore, because I also can see that it's not. And there are, so I mean, a particular example, you know, if a newspaper does make a mistake, it usually corrects itself. You know, it will put it in on page 7 in the corrections column at some point if it's pointed out to them and they think it's a, you know, whereas information you get on WhatsApp, you may never see the correction, or, you know, nobody's going to say, oh, you know, that message I sent you, it was wrong, actually. It just doesn't happen. So of course there are differences, but I think a lot of the skills that you need as a user are the same, and our user experience is, we hardly distinguish, really. And I think actually the younger you go, the less people really anyway, the younger you go, the less people are using physical newspapers and things like that, and the more they're doing everything through a computer. And certainly, I mean, by way of another example, you know, here in the UK, you can watch the BBC entirely on a computer. You don't necessarily need a TV. And that caused a huge problem for the BBC because we have a TV license system. But then all these people were like, well, I don't need to pay the license, I can get it free on the internet. And I tell that story just to explain that people just have merged these media together. So, and people, you know, I watch Netflix on my computer. I don't think to go to the TV to watch it. It's right here on my desktop. So yeah, it is blurred. So I'm sorry not to be more useful than that, but yeah.
No, okay. That's super. That chimes so much with what we've been doing over the past sort of few weeks in all the material, that as you say, you need some sort of models to make some progress, but quickly we realise that, you know, hard and fast categories, very hard to stick by. Thank you, Janette.
Yeah, no problem. Shall I skip on? Shall I carry on? Yeah. So I'll share my screen again, because what I want to do is another little brain teaser to make sure everybody is still awake. Here's my cartoons. Okay, I'll just drop that again down to there so you can see my screen properly. Okay, so in if you could write your answer to this in the box, I would be most grateful. I'm going to tell a story, and there's a bit of information at the end that I want you to bring to the story. So, are you listening? You're at home and there's a leak in the kitchen. It's causing chaos and water everywhere. You go on the internet, you get a number for a plumber, you call the number and book a visit time. When the plumber arrives, you open the door and the plumber says, "Hi, I'm the plumber. My name is." Can you please give me a name for the plumber? Just need a name for my story. Don't be shy, don't be shy. Dear Sean's given their own name, very good. Any other names? Joe, thank you very much. Anyone else got a name?
Oh yes, we're really tossing them up. There's a very gender mix as well.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there. So there is some gender mix, but largely we have men. However, I applaud all of you for offering a name. And Joe and let's see, who is it? Joe and Vincent can go to the front of the class because you offered a woman's name, right? The plumber could be a woman. So this is a very easy little game that you can play. It's the same with the question, how does it go? A man and a boy walk down the street. The man is, or two parents, anyway, it's, it's the idea that a man and a son, or a father and son, but then there's another parent. How can that possibly be? And of course, the other parent is the mother, but everyone forgets about the mother. So it's very easy to use gender by way of an example of unconscious bias. But it's sort of, it's a bit of an easy hit, wasn't it? But of course, what's happening in those algorithms we were talking about is that they are playing on all sorts of things, some of which we know, right? I know when I go to YouTube why they're offering me Disney princesses, because I have kids and that's what they're looking up on YouTube. But I'm also tapping in stuff that is actually part of my unconscious bias, which of course I should be aware of, and we all try to be aware of, but unconscious bias is a thing. But all that data is going somewhere and playing into the algorithm. So I just wanted to exemplify that the algorithm isn't just where you've been and what you think you're controlling going into the data pool. It's also what you're probably not controlling, really. Okay. Right, so what we're going to do next. So you've been asked, it's been asked about what is digital literacy, what is media literacy. Here I have some definitions for media literacy. Again, you know, just like the landscape itself, just like the term fake news itself, there is not a universal agreement on it. You can of course go to a dictionary, but you know, here are two eminent bodies in the world who, certainly in their own countries, who have slightly different definitions of it. Media literacy education requires active inquiry and critical thinking, affirms that people use their skills to construct their own messages. Ofcom says, yes, you need skills and so on, but it's about protecting yourself and protecting your family from the potential risks. When you go to news literacy, the definitions take you even further. Reuters refers to the knowledge about how the media is made and how it's selected. The Economist Foundation says it's about having knowledge and skills as a user. You know, so you can see that they're all sort of in the same place, but they're not all, they're not totally lining up with each other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go to, I want to see you all again. How do I do that? Stop sharing screen. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to come here and just continue a little bit that conversation we're having about who's responsible for it and what is the digital literacy answer. Okay, so we've talked a bit about, you know, who could be responsible, who could be a player in helping to tidy it up. And, you know, the platforms are doing some work in this space. They do fund some media, news and digital literacy work, and some of them are involved in finding tech solutions. The BBC, for example, is involved with various platforms in a project to watermark, to try and find a watermark system for fake videos. So we talked about the past and present. I mean, they're also here now, but they will get better and better, those fake videos, and people will be able to do them on their phones pretty convincingly pretty soon, if not already. So there's lots of tech solutions going on in the background as well. And of course, you know, there's some, they're funding fact checkers and verification. There's some pushback from that, we know, but there has been some money towards that. And they're also, you know, they're increasingly changing their algorithms themselves. So I would say at this point, if you Googled words connected to one of today's news stories, high up would probably come trusted news organizations in your search. And that wasn't always the case. And to find stuff that isn't that reliable, you'd have to go quite far down, if not onto page 2. And you know, Google will tell you nobody goes to page 2, nobody even scrolls down, they just take the first 3. But of course, what Google still do is have sponsored content up high. So, and as we saw earlier, that's a big problem in that not everybody, I think it was a 50% figure, wasn't it, recognises sponsored ads for what it is. But if we then turn to some of the media, let's call it some of the news and digital literacy work that's been going on. Here's some, let me just give you a bit of a picture of the landscape that's out there. So there's a huge range. They sit in various places, some like this MOOC, they sit online, some work like MOOCs or a course that you can do. Lots of the American universities have put up courses that you can do in media and digital literacy. Or they might just be there on a website that you can access at any point. A lot of the fact-checking sites have got content that you can access. They tend to be pretty, I mean, you're the educators, but they tend to be what I would say are pretty classroom style approaches. They'll be organized by lesson plan, by topic, and those kinds of things, sort of, you know, tried and tested classic education tools, I suppose. And they tend to be a mix of text, pictures, video, a bit of face-to-face if possible, if it's, you know, depending on the platform that they sit. There does seem to be, there tends to be a distinction between what's available for young people, children in particular, meaning sort of, you know, primary school, and what's available for adults. And then here's where I'm really interested, because so I'm interested in terms of what their approach is. So some of them work on what that Reuters definition had. What is the how is news made? The behind the scenes of news. Who owns it? What's the motive? Where is it advertised? Where is it not advertised? And so on. Another one, which is pretty much the BBC model, is about understanding good journalism, and that if you understand the principles of good journalism, it will make you better consumers of journalism, because you'll be able to spot when it's poor and not very well put together. Lots of people have tried acronyms. SIFT is probably the best known acronym. I can assure you, having looked for an acronym for the BBC, it is not easy to find an acronym. Just for time's sake, please look up SIFT yourselves. If you haven't already covered it, you probably have come across it. The BBC uses REAL, which stood for is it real? What's the evidence? A for ask questions, and L for look around. Lots of people have traffic light systems, RAG rated systems, so red, amber, green systems. Lots of articles rather than courses will go for the top 10 tips on this, the top 3 tips on that, rhymes, take care before you share, and so on. And then you have people like Joel Breakstone from Stanford. They did a piece of work which asked who was best at finding out that a piece of information was fake or false. And it turned out the fact checkers, even over traditional journalists, were the best. And the key thing that they did was what they've rather cumbersomely called lateral reading. But what that means is the fact checkers went away from the story very early on in trying to decide whether a story was real or not. And what that meant was they were able to verify the information very quickly, whereas journalists and public tended to scroll all the way down to the bottom to see if there were any clues within the article itself. So one of Stanford's teaching methods is move away from the article, go somewhere else to see if you can cross-check it in some way. And then the BBC's approach is a sort of mix of, as I say, teaching journalism skills and acronyms. And we've tended to work with young people, but we have also done some work with adults. So Emma, look, there is one more game that we can play, but I'm aware of the time and I want to make sure that any questions that come up are answered. I'm happy to give you a set of links for things if that's helpful.
That would be super. I don't want to take away any further interaction. I'd love to do the next game, and then if we may just take 2 minutes at the end for me to sum up all of the wonderful points and
sure.
moments of reflection to finish up. So over to you, Janette, and then
I'll... Yeah, okay. I just think Tobias has a conversant with digital literacy while the learners are at ground zero. Yeah, okay. So yes, what I haven't covered, and what the BBC tends not to do, actually the BBC have done, but not in this project, is how to use the technology at all. So that, I mean, if that's what you mean by zero, then that is not my expertise, I'm afraid, Tobias, but it is out there, and there are lots of people who do that kind of work. If you mean in terms of zero for once they know how to use the material but have no literacy skills in terms of the content that they come across. I mean, I think that really, I think in the school context, all of it starts in your history lessons with the question of who is the source. And if that's not on the curriculum, then you're in real trouble for almost everything else. So I guess that's what I would say with that. So if I may, I'll just do one more game then with you all. This is just by way of giving you a little taster of some of the BBC content and the kind of style that we use to do it. So you can see here I think there are 15 images here. I might be wrong, there might be more, but these all represent different sources from where you can get your information. So I'll just go through them very quickly. The top one is supposed to represent people, family, friends, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube. This is a news, so it could be your local news or national news. And then we have WhatsApp, Google, BBC News. We have a governmental building, that could be the government wherever you are, or the local government wherever you are. A police line, so supposed to represent authority. It could be the police, or you can slightly interpret it as you wish. And then we have newspapers, Instagram, Twitter, Wikipedia, and the last picture is supposed to be celebrities and influencers. So what we do in the classroom context is, when we're delivering workshops is, and I'm going to ask you now, is to say, first of all, in the chat, of all those sources, who do you trust the most? Let's have a look. Who do you trust the most of all those sources? None. Fair enough, Peter. Oh, newspaper, BBC, thank you. Kurtika, thank you. Myself, okay, fair enough, BBC. Most likely BBC, okay. And I'm just going to flip the question on its head. Who do you trust the least?
Which government are we talking about?
You can choose. You can choose. There's no prizes.
Oh,
I know. Government. Thank you, Rachel. Newspaper, WhatsApp, politicians, Facebook, Wikipedia, celebrity. Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, and stop. So what tends to happen in the classroom is exactly that. You get this mix of answers. Police, for example, tends to be both. Within the same classroom, you might get different people saying it's the most trusted and the least trusted, right? Government the same. Depending on where you are in the world, the answer to that question is likely to be different, or depending on who you are with, that question is supposed to be different. So one of the things that we teach is, well, we do it 3 ways. The first way is we say, okay, your journalist questions are who, what, where, when, how, why. And we take those questions and we interrogate their answers using, well, who is that person and why do you trust them? And what is it about them that, so we use those as leaders to ask questions. So that's one way we do it. Another way we do it is to use, instead of SIFT, we've got this REAL acronym. So we say, really, would you really trust that person? What's your evidence for trusting them? What question, I'll ask more questions about them. And can you look around and find another source? And then the third way, which is the last thing I'll leave you with, is we say, okay, what we always say at the BBC is, we're not going to tell you who to trust. That is not our job to tell you who to trust. I know who I trust, and I know that the BBC works very hard to gain and retain people's trust. But we're not there to tell people who to trust. But we can offer 3 questions. The first question is, what is it you want to know and who's best placed to tell you? So the classic in this one is, whatever you think of Trump, if you want to know what colour the sofa is in the Oval Office, he probably knows the answer to that question. That's the sort of, what's the word, slightly flippant demonstration of that. But let's take another one. Actually, if you want to know if a big traffic jam and traffic accident has been cleared up in the centre of your city or town where you live, even if you didn't put the police very high up on who you trust, actually the police Twitter account probably knows. Okay, so you probably would go to both the police and the Twitter account. So that's the first question to ask. Who's best placed to tell me what it is that I want to know? The second question we ask is, what do I know about that source and their reputation, their motives, are they paid for, and so on? And depending on the age level you're working with, you can take that to a more complicated or less complicated degree. And then the third one, of course, is the unconscious bias one, which is, what am I bringing to this question? Am I trusting people who I want to trust because they already reflect my views? Or so am I letting the facts inform my opinion, or my opinion be informed by the facts? So that's the third question that we offer people to take away. So, as you can see, it is not an easy road. There are so many aspects and elements to the literacy questions that, I had a conversation with somebody this week who we're hopefully going to set up a project. And in the end, we both had to admit that reluctantly, you're kind of always throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. And of course, by now you've learned which bits of spaghetti stick really well. And so, you begin to build up a toolbox for how you can help this problem. But it's not a silver bullet. And it's also going to be, as I said before, a lifelong thing. We are always going to have to update our own and other people's digital literacy skills. I really hope that's been interesting and useful.
Oh, my goodness, Janette, thank you so much. And I feel we could sit here for the next few hours.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for such a wonderful overview and for really sort of piquing interest. I'm going to do the sort of 1-minute challenge, as it were, just to tie us all up before everyone goes off for the rest of their days. But if I can start at the end, really, as the point of the unconscious bias, and wonderfully you foreshadowed what we're going to move on to next week, that idea that it's not just the questions that we ask of all the other content, but also the questions that we need to ask of ourselves. And I suppose that's something that's really come to the forefront with the raising of public awareness on misinformation or different sorts of information, is the emotion, and the times when that emotion, I suppose the levels rise, especially when there's confusion in the news stories or the situations that we really want to unpick. So in the past hour, I feel there's so many points that I could sort of pull out, but I'd also like to sort of pull out that silver bullet. And it's something I read in so much of the literature and the people who are working at the forefront of this field. And I think that's really why we don't have the sort of hard and fast ready solutions, as you were saying, Janette, because it's really a movement. And everyone who's joined us today, wherever you are in the world, you are part of that movement and feel empowered to go back to your classrooms or your professional settings, and indeed your home settings, and start these conversations. And that's really what it's about, I think, at this point, is having those conversations, asking all those questions, being sure of which questions are supposed to ask, and that, you know, stopping and taking pause and reflection in this messy, busy world, online and offline, that we all have. And I suppose then to end on the sort of broader point of where these different solutions so-called lie. So thank you so much, Janette, for bringing up that sort of moderation, regulation, education sort of triad in some ways. And it's, well, it's still unsure, isn't it? But as you were saying, there is now this move within different legislations to try and strike that balance between regulating platforms but not censoring. Where do we moderate? How do we moderate? And we've got the International Fact-Checking Network, Full Facts One in the UK, doing some wonderful work. But there's just so much to work through and to stay on top of. So I suppose to really end that, it comes down to each and every one of us at this point to come together, be part of that movement, have the conversations, and be ready to maybe change some of the stances that we might have previously had, and be mindful, I suppose, the conditioning and the schooling that probably did not address a lot of these questions. So thank you so much again. It's been a huge privilege to have you with us, and so wonderfully complementing some of the material. And I feel, as I say, that we could keep going, but I'm mindful of the time. So at this point, if I can reiterate my thanks to yourself, Janette, and also colleagues. Thank you. And colleagues joining us at the crack of dawn over in Canada, and a bit later in the day in Malta and London. And just to say that the MOOC is still running, the Digital Literacy Lab for Educators. So if you're curious to come and sort of continue some of these reflections, as I say, we've got a really busy forum, a real community of practice coming together. So do come and join us, and I will share some details just before we sign off. So have a super day, evening, be truth seekers. As Janette's encouraging all of us to do. And my goodness, what some wonderful tips and techniques and brain teasers to trial out in our various settings. Thank you so much.
Bye.